Hi everyone, welcome back to The Compass. I'm your host, Ben Wyant.
And I'm Caroline Jelly.
We're here to talk about religion and different topics in our world and basically how we can learn more about those things and make us more aware and educated.
Exactly. And before we move on, one thing we wanted to mention, we decided to do a little bit of rebranding. So I know last semester, was the cross and compass, but this semester we're keeping it simple, just the compass.
Yes, new name, new us, same God. Today we're going to talk about Christianity and science.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into those two subjects a little bit and talk about if people agree if they go together pretty well, or talk about if people think that maybe they're not the best subjects to go together.
Exactly, and we're going to get deeper into that later, Caroline, but right now we're going to go to Maddie Barrett and Lydia Perry, who are two of our reporters that are around campus hearing some student and faculty perspectives.
Okay, so my first question is, how does science and Christianity complement each other?
I guess because the Bible's historical and a lot of science comes behind that as well. So yeah.
Science and Christianity, I think, complement each other because at the root of religion and at the root of science, I think there are very committed individuals who find a lot of common ground. For instance, if you were to look at a lot of the scientific claims, even though they're provable here on Earth, it still takes a little bit of faith to understand, especially when you get to origin, how we all got here. There are questions that science can't answer that I think Christianity does, like what gives something value, or what gives something beauty, or why is there emotions like love and things like that. So I think they're compatible. I think science fills in some of the holes that Christianity may have, and Christianity fills in maybe some of the holes that science have. I think they're very compatible. You really need both, in my humble opinion.
So what does science and Christianity look like long-term to you in the way that you live your life? Is it joint? Is it separate? How do you feel about that?
It's joined. I double major in Bible and psychology, so the majority of my time is spent figuring out how to integrate those two together. And I think it's important to know how to understand people's minds just as much as it is their spirits.
Perfect. And how do you think that science and Christianity complement each other?
Yeah, the same God that wrote the story of the Bible is the God that created the people around us and the world around us. And so to understand science is to understand the heart of God. And there's more than enough metaphors in the natural world that point to ways that he relates to us in Scripture as well.
All right, awesome. Well, have a good day, and we'll see you later. Thank you so much. That was deep. We got some good man on the streets, and I'm going to go hide in the classroom now.
So after hearing a little bit of what the students had to say out and about, Ben and I wanted to have kind of a little more casual conversation about science and Christianity and how they relate to each other.
Right, just kind of give our perspective on things.
Exactly.
So,
kind of like
Caroline,
a TED Talk.
Yeah. Caroline, what's the first thing that you think about when you hear Christianity and science?
So the first thing I would have to say is I immediately go to creation and nature and how God created and how he expresses himself through the form of nature in itself.
There are different theories of creation, of course. The two kind of categories that you can lump them into are old earth or young earth creation.
Okay.
And so old earth creation is the idea that you believe the earth is old, as in 14 billion years old, like science proves.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Dongel's class.
Young earth, while it's 6,000 years,
Right.
sounds like a lot, that's still an old earth, but not nearly what science lays out.
No, not even a fraction.
And so there are different theories that play into each one of those. So some of the old earth theories that accept the idea that the earth's been around for 14 billion years.
Yeah.
Some think that there's this gap that happened between
Right.
Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2.
Gap theory.
Right.
Okay.
And that basically there was some sort of catastrophe and God reconstructed the earth.
Right. And possibly even another ecosystem
and that,
in itself.
And that explains the dinosaurs and
Yeah.
all of that.
Jurassic periods,
Right.
Ice Age periods.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Another is that or at least another young Earth theory is that's kind of similar, was there's sort of a flood that happened at the beginning, the Spirit hovering over the waters that's talked about in the Genesis story. And what that theory says is that the immense pressure of this flood that happened created fossils and a world that looks like it's way older than it really is.
Okay.
So while in the reality, the Earth has only been around for 6,000 years,
Right.
it looks like it's been around for 14 billion years. And that's why scientific evidence points to that.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense, honestly, because I don't know if we have the technology to prove those kind of ancient relics of sorts, like we don't know. Like, I know that science has advanced to a point where we can tell how old some things are, but I just don't think there's enough to really be able to confirm everything and all of it.
Right. Now, of course, one other theory that people kind of adopt is like, is Genesis literal? Or is it poetry and
literal
literature
24 day,
that was passed
24
down
hour
by the
days.
Israelites? Right. Like,
Okay.
And so is it more of, is it less important that God tells us the order that specific things were created on specific days?
Right.
Or is the point just God created these things and humans are distinctly different, right?
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know one thing we wanted to get into was the scientific process, and I guess how scientists, or just like inquisitive people of nature, can learn from different things that they observe on Earth. And so getting into that, the first step of the scientific process is observing and asking a question, and therefore presenting a hypothesis in order to experiment on it and prove it, whether it's factual or whether it was just a cool idea that you kind of came up with. And we were kind of talking earlier about how you can do the same thing with like your walk with God and even with scripture in itself. And I think it's really cool to relate science with how you observe your walk with God and how you observe scripture and how God presents it to us, because it is God breathed, so it's exactly what he wants us to hear and know. And so it's interesting to think about how, as a Christian, in a way, you are a scientist, because you're inquisitive about what it is to be on this earth and what life itself is and what existence means to us.
Yeah.
So that's something that if you would like to get into.
Yeah, well, and I think that like maybe we should be careful in our conversation, because it's seeming like we're presenting a lot of information that
There's a lot of information.
Science and Christianity go perfectly together,
Yeah.
right? Like, but that's just not the case when we look at everything. Even though the people that we heard around campus seem to agree that they really work hand in hand nicely together, there are some cases where that just doesn't work.
Right.
And one of those is evolution.
Yeah.
So I guess what do you think about evolution? Just really
That's
short.
a hard question.
Yeah.
So quickly, evolution, I'm a Christian, so obviously I don't believe in maybe the average common meaning of evolution that you hear here and there, I don't believe in evolution as it is. Obviously I believe in maybe like adaptations, like survival of the fittest, like animals have been able to adapt to their environments in order to grow, reproduce, eat. That is their instinct,
Yeah.
When it comes to evolution regarding creation, that's a really hard question to kind of dive into.
Right, because there's these like two differing ideas or definitions of evolution. Right?
Yeah.
You've got the broad like theory of creation of evolution, where man and all life came from a microorganism.
Yeah.
And some Christians believe that that's how that's the method that God used, but a lot of Christians say that that's against Scripture.
Well,
and it's kind of what I'm hearing from
and
you.
each to their own,
And then there's the other evolution of smaller, like you said, survival of the fittest, adaptations that species undergo due to their environment to help survive. But at the end of the day, I think that we can agree that as much as we can talk about how God created. Mm-hmm. And science is kind of the fun what-if game of how that works out.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that he's given us access to explore, something that he wants us to explore. And I think sometimes it can be taken too far and the point is missed of what the leap of faith is to be a Christian. So I guess that's where we could kind of end off at, you know.
So we've got, before we go, we've got one last perspective that we're going to hear from a SWU student. We're going to come back from a break with Caroline sitting down here with them in the studio, and we'll be right back.
Hi, so I'm here with Malachi Beck, a student here at SWU, and I'm going to be asking him some questions about today's topic. So Malachi, what is your year and major here at SWU?
Yes, so I'm a junior here at Southern Wesleyan, third year, so that's exciting, and I'm majoring in biology.
Nice. So what is your calling in the science field, and what are your plans for after graduation?
Yes, so I think my calling in the science field would have to be optometry, and so the great thing about biology is that it's so broad, and so we just get to learn about a little bit of everything. But this is kind of like a stepping stone for me to get to what I think God has called me to do, which is optometry.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So for the viewers and for myself, what exactly is optometry?
Optometry, yes. So optometry is basically a general eye care professional, and so whether you scratch your eye or whether you just can't see if you need glasses or anything like that, an optometrist is the first person that you would see. But the cool thing about it is that you should always get an eye exam every year, because there are a lot of things that can affect your eye and you'll have no idea, aka glaucoma, guys. So look out for glaucoma, and you'll have no idea that it's happening. So always get an eye exam.
Awesome. I'll have to get updated on my eye exam.
Get an
eye
eye
care. So how do you connect your faith to science?
How to connect my faith to science? Well, you know, it's really cool because when I was first thinking about coming to Southern Wesleyan, I said, okay, well, I'm going to a Christian school, but I'm majoring in a science. And so I was very interested to see, how are they going to relate biology and the Bible? How is that going to work? It can't work. And so in my first class that I took, organismal biology, we talked about evolution, and I was like, oh, evolution, natural selection, all of those good things.
Yeah.
And so when we think about the origin of life, how did life originate? Not how Earth was started, but how life originated. You basically had, you know, a really harsh environment, harsh atmosphere with methane, ammonium, nitrogen, just gases floating around in the air. And you had a lot of volcanic eruptions, and you had lightning and everything that happens like that. And so there were basically a bunch of inorganic compounds that were happening, that were just floating around in the atmosphere. Then the lightning struck, and then we are producing some type of organic compounds that we can use for life. And so these organic compounds later transposed into amino acids, which are just proteins, basically. Proteins in your muscle, everything else, enzymes, everything that you need. However, so we said, okay, we were able to create these things. So in order for it to be good science, let's try and replicate that today, like in today's times. And so we've had a lot of other scientists try and do that exact same thing, and they were able to produce those proteins, but the necessary things needed for life, such as like nucleotides, which are found in your DNA, which makes you who you are, or ribose, which is the sugar in RNA that helps, you know, transpose into proteins that we need. We weren't able to do that. And so there are just a bunch of little small inconsistencies in science that we don't have an answer to, but we say, yes, we recognize these inconsistencies are there, these gaps, but let's just acknowledge that and keep going. And so being a Christian scientist is like, okay, well, I know that the creation points to the creator, and so you're not going to be able to understand everything that's going on, but I know in my heart who's behind it all. So,
wow, that's really cool. It's a really interesting perspective to take that from. So, all this being said, what role does science play in your walk and faith with God? How do you link the two together?
Right, and so sometimes I just think, you know, me, I don't have it all together. You know, I think about, okay, what does the Bible say and what does science say? And so some things when it comes to like evolution, saying that we came from monkeys or things like that, I sometimes believe, you know, like, and this sounds kind of out there, you know, but some people in our population, you know, have that phenotype where they could maybe look like that. See something like that, or a trait coming involved. And so I don't know, there's just some things that I'm still trying to get used to when relating science and Christianity.
Okay.
So.
And so back to talking about optometry and your future plans. What is it about that sort of ministry that really is a calling for you in a way?
Right, and so I always thought, well, Malachi, you're not majoring in ministry, or you're not majoring in to be a pastor or anything like that.
Right.
And so how could you possibly use optometry to spread the faith? But oftentimes people go through difficult situations, or you're dealing with old people, you're dealing with people that have coronavirus or had coronavirus, and they've lost so many people in their family. And so a lot of times people are just hurting and they just want to be heard and someone there to relate with them. And so that's an amazing opportunity for you to go in and share the gospel with them.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Well, thank you for being on our show
My
today. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Compass. And please tune in for our next episode, which is going to be on Christianity and culture. My name is Caroline Jelly, and thank you for joining us.